We are average, everyday people trying to figure out how to do the job, just like there are people out there in the community. They're trying to figure out, how do I get my kid to handle the remote learning? How do I do whatever job it is that I have to do? And how do I function in this life where everything's changed? So we tried to do in Westchester County the things that people in Westchester County did for themselves as well. So now we come into this year, boy, do we have a tough budget. From March on, we don't know what to expect. We were fortunate. We were fortunate that the federal government, through the CARES Act, was able to provide resources that we could use to help us balance our budget. But that takes care of 2020. It doesn't take care of 21 to the greater extent. We were fortunate that there was a rally in the country, and we started to see better than worst case scenario revenue numbers. At the end of the day, if we can deliver a tax reduction in a year where people knew that we had a tough time, that is to the credit, not just me, but it's the credit of all of us that we were prepared to try to fulfill the commitment that was made. I made a commitment before the pandemic that we would freeze property taxes for 2 years in a row. We could do that on the basis of revenue that we received. Last year, we were able to improve on that by reducing property taxes, and we honored a commitment that we made. We recognize that in this moment where people were assessing their lives in light of a pandemic, that some number of people might want to say, you know what, this is a good time for me to leave the workforce. And we gave people a financial incentive, but we didn't force them. We didn't say you must take this or you're going to be fired with no benefit. It told everybody else in the government, you are valued. If you can structure your proposals, your plans, with everybody's thought in mind, you get the maximum buy-in. And that's what we've had as we go into this budget. We have a buy-in where we know our capital projects are necessary. It can help people be employed. At the same time, we protect our assets. We get a buy-in with not-for-profits that shows that, no, we're not going to devastate them because we have some difficulties. Then you come to the budget period of time, and now you're looking at the budget as a policy document, not just as, well, we have to keep the numbers low in order to reduce taxes. You wind up having your financial people come back to you saying, George, you've given us the flexibility. We think through these actions, these activities, we can keep the property taxes down. And that's where we stand with this budget. We have a much better budget than anybody had a right to expect, or did I, at the end of March. We can't waive away taxes. That's just not possible in the society. But in addition to cutting them, we can also forestall the date. All of those things basically say this: we're neighbors in this county, and we're not going to turn our back on our neighbors and say, hey, you know what, sorry, we can't help you. No, we can help you, and the way we set the tax levy and the way we set the level of services is a reflection of that.
Good morning. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and I'm here today with the key members of my executive team: Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins, Director of Operations Joan McDonald. We also have with us our Budget Director Larry Sewell, and Gideon Grant, our Deputy Budget Director. The Chairman of the Westchester County Board of Legislators is with us today, the Honorable Ben Boykin. The Majority Leader of the Board of Legislators is with us, the Honorable Mary Jane Shimsky. We have our Deputy Director of Operations, Emily Saltzman, and Catherine Chaffee, members of her communications team, for our annual significant presentation of the 2021 county budget. We've had a very difficult year. We've all known that. We've said that over the course of the year, but I think in every decision we were making, beginning with March to this point in time, we knew that the major issue we would have to deal with was how would we prepare ourselves to finance going into 2021. And when we stood here a year ago, we did not have the pandemic in our sights in early November of 2019, anticipating the 2020 budget. We had projected in the 2020 budget a significant revenue stream and sales tax that would allow us to do a number of different things that we all took great pride in. And as we presented the budget to the Board of Legislators, and ultimately as they reviewed it and modified it and we finalized it in December, we were able to do some things that were very important to us. A year ago, we cut county property tax levy by $1 million. A year ago, we were able to invest significantly in infrastructure. Some of that was in the capital budget, but supported by the operation budget. We had initiatives in housing and economic development and environment that were important to us. We had a complete across-the-board protection of our services, and we went into the 2020 year in a very positive light. We had done a number of things that we felt were good fiscal policies relative to pensions and certiorari's and money in the reserve funds, and all of those things got set upside down when COVID hit us strong. COVID in March, in April, in May, in June, July, August, September, October, and now into November is a reality for us. And as we stand here today in early to mid-November, it is still a reality to us as we close out this year through December and into the new year. We hope that we will see, the promising signs of a vaccine that may be coming, but until they come, we don't know that. And at this stage of the game, we're looking at concerns and costs that are driven by what happened in COVID. We have issues that we didn't have a year ago to the same degree of complexity or the same degree of intensity. But it's important for us to understand that we are a flexible team and a flexible government. We're a government that is not as close to the people as the cities, the towns, and the village, but we're also a local government and we're the next nearest thing. County legislators and myself and our executive team are out in the communities talking to people, listening to what their concerns are. So as we interacted with our budget department before this presentation, we wanted to make sure that we gave the best balance of the needs that people have and feel, but also the responsibilities that we have in running this government. This government is a significant size government, and it has mandated expenses and costs. 65 to 70% of what we do is mandated by either the state or the federal government. Now, for most people watching, they don't really grasp that. A mandate is when your dad told you to be home by 12 o'clock with the car. That was a mandate. If you weren't home by 12 o'clock with the car, you were in big trouble with dad. That was not debatable. That was not negotiable in those days. That is what a mandate is. And we are mandated to do many things in this county. So when people sort of generally say, well, you're spending this, you're doing that, what they don't see is how the state of New York has required the county governments, not just Westchester, but the other county governments, to do certain functions regardless of whether we want to do it to the same degree or not. We had to provide space for 16 and 17-year-old young people who were going to be incarcerated. They had committed a crime worthy of incarceration, and we had to segment them from our county jail. Didn't matter that we had plenty of space in the county jail. Didn't matter that we run a well-recognized county jail with lots of innovative programs. We still needed to separate them, and we had to spend significant money, I'll say in the vicinity of $40 million, in order to adopt the Woodfield Cottage facility to satisfy a mandate. So the budget that we have a certain amount of discretion. We've tried to work within that discretion in order to do the job that we're here to do. But we must keep in mind that so much of what we do is mandated. We're joined by County Legislator Catherine Borgia, who is the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. In about 40 minutes or so, this will stop being my main headache and it will become her main headache as part of the Board of Legislators' responsibilities. When COVID hit us, we knew that we were going to have a drop in revenue. We asked the budget department to give us their best projections of the damage, which meant the worst-case scenario projections. They gave us worst-case scenario projections for those revenue streams that were affected by economic activity. As it turns out, the property tax revenue stream was not affected. In fact, Westchester has become a desirable place for people to move to from New York City, as it always has been, but even more so during the pandemic. So it didn't affect the property tax revenue stream, but we weren't sure of that. We were prepared to make a number of decisions, and some we did make in that regard. We knew it would affect the sales tax revenue stream, which is our primary revenue stream as we put the 2020 budget together. We also did not know what would happen at the state level of government because we knew that the state had a significant budget gap themselves. And the more you rely on revenue streams that are impacted by the environment, the more difficult it is for you to close the budget gap. So while the local governments are primarily property taxes, which is a guaranteed revenue stream, more reliable revenue stream, the county sales tax, but property tax is almost an equal player. When you go to the state level, it's income tax and sales tax and business tax, and that's all economically driven. So the state's gap is proportionally worse to the state than ours is to ours, and we did not know exactly how the state would solve their budget problems at the expense of our budget problems. We also did not know what role the federal government would play during COVID. And there was lots of debate. There's still debate to this day as to what type of resources the federal government can make available. But when I gave the State of the County message a little less than a month ago, I used the line that the state of Westchester County is fierce. And I meant it. And that fierceness is not just posturing. It's not what you do when you're in a schoolyard fight and you try to act like you're ready to duke it out with anybody. It's a state of intensity, whether it shows on your face every day or in your words every day, that you do not intend to let these things affect the way we do our job to the point where we can't function. That each of us, and that includes the legislature, that includes everybody who works for this government in any departmental capacity, we are not going to let what COVID did to hurt us stop us from doing our job. And putting together the budgetary responsibilities, honoring the budgetary responsibilities and putting together the budget that we have here reflects the fact that we respect what those tasks are. Westchester County treats sewerage not a sexy cocktail conversation to be had with your friends when you're together, but it is an essential service every day. And when the local government picks up the garbage and the recyclables in front of your house, they deliver it to a transfer station, and then Westchester County takes over and takes the garbage and the recyclables and gets it to its final destination. And that is where your county government money goes. We run an airport, and we run a bus system. That bus system, which was impacted badly by this, and we had a big drop in ridership, starting to come back. That is the second busiest bus system in the state of New York. New York City, of course, is number one. More people ride a Westchester bus than in Nassau County or in Buffalo or in Albany or in any other part of this state. Westchester County has the second busiest bus system, and it serves those people that don't have transportation here in the suburbs. And on task after task after task, we've just found out how much we need a health department with professional healthcare nurses going out to provide COVID tests before we ever had testing stations. And in other parts of the health department, not related to COVID, we have people who go into every restaurant kitchen in this county to make sure that the conditions are safe and sanitary. So when you eat outdoors or you eat indoors, you're eating in a safe environment. That's the county health department that's responsible for that. And department by department by department, the substance of this budget are people who are doing their jobs professionally in areas that are essential, whether you see it or whether you don't see it. When you jump in a swimming pool in your condo complex, you know that the water does not have any type of pollution in or pathogens in it because it's been inspected by somebody from Westchester County. So I say that not because I'm giving a class 101 on county government, but because you need to understand those things to appreciate what this budget is and the effort that took to try to provide this budget. So on the specifics, the 2021 budget as proposed by the county administration to be submitted now to the legislature for their review over the next month and change is a $2.091 billion budget, meaning $2.091 billion. That is a decrease in spending of $16 million over last year's budget, a decrease in overall spending in the county budget. Secondly, it includes a cut of $1 million in real property tax levy. That is the second straight year that we have proposed a budget that cuts county property taxes. And when you look at the $1 million, you need to multiply that out in terms of what its impact may be to you as an individual. Your county property taxes are anywhere from 20 to 25% of your total tax bill, wherever you may live. The school taxes that you pay are far and away the greatest amount of your taxes, probably two-thirds of what you pay in taxes. Your municipal government, depending on the size and scope of your government, makes up the remaining 15 to 20%. But last year, our cut of $1 million generated a cut of 2% in county property taxes for New Rochelle, Eastchester, Mount Pleasant, North Salem, a 3% county tax cut for Scarsdale, Newcastle, Mamaroneck Town, a 4% cut for Rye City, Bedford, North Castle, a 5% cut for Pound Ridge. What those cuts represent is the equalization rate applied to the assessment rolls of what a $1 million tax cut levy is. So without knowing what the equalization rates will do this year, this is not something to look at as a percentage and say, oh, the percentage is this. The actual real benefit of people who live in Ossining, who had a 1% decrease, or also decreases in Greenberg and Somers, those are real cuts in their property taxes that was created by last year's $1 million cut. We have replicated that. We're cutting an additional $1 million out of the property tax levy in this budget. We have made a point to maintain services across all departments. There is no department that is being slashed here. We have not done as have been done in the past. We've cut out certain positions in county operations in order to force the legislature to focus their time and attention in restoring those positions. We believe that positions are necessary in order for us to provide the right services. We put those positions in the budget. There's a debate to be had over whether additional or redirected resources are there, but there's no games being played here. There is no games being played in terms of the way we look at one-shots in the budget. We're not balancing this budget because we're selling a piece of land. We're not balancing this budget because we have a one-time revenue that won't repeat itself, and we purposefully use it for this purpose. We're looking at a budget in which we have allocated $695 million in sales tax revenue. That is below what we budgeted last year. It's a little above what we had this year in terms of what we expect we're going to close the year out with. We have $568 million in property taxes. Now, we have had a surplus in this year's budget because of the COVID CARES Act money, which came to us and allowed us in 2020 to apply expenses in 4 key departments to COVID care funds. In our emergency services department, in our health department, in our public safety department, and in our corrections department. That last piece came in a change in the regulations that came during the summer. But we all know that our health department worked tremendously hard and has continued to do so during COVID. We know our emergency services department provided PPE as a clearinghouse and was deeply involved in the COVID response. Our police department, our county police department, worked in that excess period of time. And, of course, we had the same challenge in the correctional institution to make sure it was secure for the prisoners there, make sure there was no outbreak of COVID. And we avoided the kind of massive in-prison outbreak that you've seen in other states in the nation. That did not happen here in Westchester County. So because the COVID CARE Act money could cover those costs, we were able to drop to the reserve fund for this year, as we close it out, a significant amount of money, $80 million as a round number. You'll ask for the specifics and get the specifics as you discuss this in your committees. That money carried forward to 2021 helps us balance this budget. And that's an important element. We are not dipping into the reserve fund below what it was when we began the 2020 year. It was about $75 million. This budget will allow for a similar reserve fund of $75 million. Now, you create a reserve fund. It's often called a rainy day fund because a rainy day comes. Well, if this isn't the classic rainy day, I don't know what is. This is the monsoon day that has come with expenses that we couldn't have anticipated. To complete the budget year of 2020, plan for the 2021 budget year, knowing that we're going to reduce spending, we're going to reduce taxes, we're going to maintain services, and we're not going to dip deeply into the reserve fund and still carry a $75 million reserve fund, is really to the credit of the budget department and the way they've been able to analyze our use of COVID CARES money and be able, in each different department of this county government, to make savings and various other decisions all across the year to maintain that we would be able to deliver this by the end of the year. And I have to add that our voluntary separation initiative, which was taken up by 226, I think, employees overall, was a step in this direction. Other counties laid people off. Other counties had furloughs. And when you furlough somebody, when you lay them off, you hurt the economy. You make it less likely that people will be able to go out and consume, and families become unstable in the way that they're being able to handle their economics. By doing a voluntary separation agreement, which the Board of Legislators agreed to and we implemented in July, August period of time, we were able to reduce the number of people working for the county, to do it in a way that was completely voluntary on the part of the individuals, and at the same time get us to a number that we could survive in without having to have the axe come down on people's heads. We also think it's very important to highlight that as we look into this budget, there is no significant estimation of federal assistance beyond what is normal. We did not balance this budget by inflating what we thought the feds might give us, and therefore we would then solve ourselves. Some counties have done that. They have made an estimation of what they thought the feds will do, and then if that money doesn't come through, then they'll do budget cuts in the middle of the year. And every county's got a different set of circumstances. I don't sit in judgment on what other counties do. But in our case, we did not do that. And this budget also takes into account the 20% cut or holding back of money that the state has indicated was necessary for them to do to all local governments. So this budget takes that into account already. This budget takes into account, and the area of not-for-profits, always an area of discussion and debate between our two branches of government. This takes into account last year's budgeted amount, which is $14.5 million in the aggregate, and we add 2% to that number. We've had requests from some of the not-for-profits, a subsection of them asking for 5% increase. We've had quite a few that say, just hold the line, don't cut us. And we're able to honestly and realistically add 2% to that number. Now, the Board of Legislators has its discretion to look at revenues or resources that exist in this budget, and it may be the choice of the legislature to add to that in this or in any other category. That is your prerogative. The debate about how far we go is what we'll be discussing between the two branches of government over the next month. Hopefully we can come to common agreements of changes that you want to make to the budget that we feel comfortable with, that we can then agree to, and then we have an agreed-upon modified budget, which at some point you will pass and at some point we will sign. And, the veto realities are there, but we'll only use it in an extreme situation. We think we can come to common ground between both branches of government as we deal with these different issues. It's important to note, for those that focus on this, we've estimated that in this budget, $1.1 billion is allocated for human services. And that aggregates the money we spend in the DSS department, what we spend in the mental health department, what we spend in public health, some of our Human Rights Commission office, our Office for Women, Veterans Affairs. In that aggregate, that's $1.1 billion for human services. Our criminal justice component of the county government, which would be our police, corrections, and probation departments, tops out at about $350 million. There's about a 3-to-1 ratio in this county over how much we spend on human service versus how much we spend on criminal justice services. We are not looking at criminal justice services as an area for cutting out of principle. We're funding them based on their needs in corrections, probation, and police. At the same time, there should be no doubt in people's minds that we have made the commitment to solve as best as we can, solve is a bad word, to address as best as we can the social needs in the county within our resources to be able to do that. And we're very proud of the fact that we keep these things in balance. As I've said about COVID, it applies in principle in terms of the budget. We are not fear-mongers. We are not sugarcoating things. We're trying to be rational, down the middle, realistic. We hold progressive values, but we also understand that there are folks that are very much structured around their tax bill and that they need tax relief, and we want to try to provide that portion of that we can do. And we want to show that we're being responsible to every corner of this county in the way we approach this. To summarize our budget, and then we'll open it up to media questions, as I'm going to make sure that I also ask our Deputy County Executive, Ken Jenkins, to say a few words about this. This government has taken the attitude, very different, I think, from some immediate predecessor government, that we are not going to govern on ideology. We are going to govern on pragmatic policies. We believe that there are things that the county government is mandated to do, and there are things that the county government, if not mandated, that we should do. We believe that government is not to rule people's lives, but is to be the arm of the society to address societal problems that can't be addressed by individuals alone. No individual with plucky individualism can repave the Bronx River Parkway. That is a public service that we provide as a government so that people have transit from one place to another. We own it. We have an obligation to maintain it and fix it. And that is the common effort of all of us to do that and all of the other programs that sit like that. And it's done on pragmatism. It's done because we know that people expect a certain amount of support so that they can live their lives peaceably and responsibly. And yes, there's an economic portion to their life, but there's more than that to their life, and we want to address all of that. And to the best extent that we can in this budget, that's what we're trying to do. Now, I'd like to ask my partner here, Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins, to share a few of his thoughts. Then we'll open it up to questions, and then we'll invite the chairman up. Mr. Deputy County Executive.
Thank you, County Executive. Certainly this particular budget, which was a culmination of the tremendous effort of all of the team, the Director of Operations and all the operations folks, Deputy Director of Operations Deputy Director of Operations Emily Saltzman, our partner, and we call it the three-headed monster up here with John McDonald, but with our Board of Legislators, because as you saw the county executive's leadership throughout the pandemic, this particular budget was shaped around that particular thing, and it doesn't happen without the partnership that we have with our friends on the Board of Legislators, our colleagues, and the separate and co-equal branch of government. The swift and aggressive action that was taken earlier this year put us in a great position to be able to have a budget that, for all the intensive purposes, was able to balance all the needs of social services, human services, and deal with our tremendous tax issues around the county. So the kind of budget that's in front of us right now, people around Westchester County should continue to look at the leadership of County Executive Latimer and making sure that we're addressing every part of this county. And it doesn't mean whatever part of the county it is, whether it's the north part of our county right down to the people that have needs and services in the southern part of our county, that all the things are being addressed. There's no increase in bus fares. As a matter of fact, there's additional services that are provided for that. There's no impact for the services that we provide. We were able to reduce personnel in particular areas without layoffs by just looking at vacancies and making sure that we're not filling those vacancies. So our not-for-profit partners, the people that have provided the services through the pandemic, creating new and innovative ways to do that, we have additional dollars for those things happening. There's over $15 million of additional services that are being given for eviction prevention and rental assistance, for food insecurity, which is a tremendous problem here around Westchester County, and we need to continue to do those things. And because of the county executive's leadership, we're able to hand that budget over to the Board of Legislators and make things happen. So with that, County Executive, I think that we are ready to take some questions, and I think so.
Very good. We'll go to some questions. First, we have Jonathan Gordon in the room from News 12. Jonathan, since you made the effort to be here in person, you get to go first.
Two quick questions. One being, specifically, how much did the county rely on federal funds to balance the books? I know you talked about the CARES Act, Families First. Is there a number you can attribute to that?
Well, let's be clear. We could not use COVID care money to balance the budget. We could use it to pay for legitimate COVID expenses, which freed up county tax levy dollars to then go for the purposes that we've identified. The allocation initially was $168 million, and I know you followed this. Out of that, we had certain amounts of money that we used for specific discrete programs. We allocated $10 million for support of local businesses. We have an initiative in this budget that involves supporting our local businesses as well. But we used $10 million of the CARES Act money for that purpose. We set aside $4 million of the CARES Act money for food insecurity. Originally it was $3.5 million. We added $500,000 to it. It went through Feeding Westchester and some of the local food pantries. We had $10 million set aside for eviction prevention and also for assisting those individuals who face foreclosure. We have not had to use quite that type of money because the courts have maintained a closure based on the governor's direction. And the COVID money has to be used by the end of the year. So some of that money, while allocated for that purpose, won't be used for that purpose by year's end. Those were initiatives where we used COVID money to address problems aggressively. But in general, and I'll use the general number that I used a second ago, we were able to achieve about an $80 million benefit out of having COVID CARES money available to us to cover legitimate expenses. That $80 million we did not spend outside of what we allocated, I've just described. We did not spend it on everyday spending. We dropped it to the reserve fund. That carries over. So now in the new budget year, with that additional money available to us as reserve fund money, we use that as a revenue to balance this budget. So I'd say $80 million is that number, but it's not strictly just COVID care money. There is the savings that occurred department by department through a host of different things that we've talked about. And you know, we're in the beginning of the budget review process. The Board of Legislators is going to go through a detailed budget review, and in committee, every single department is going to come before them and explain as many numbers as there are questions about. And in those details, you will see what actually happened in this department, what actually happened in that department for 20, and how it leads us to where we are in 21.
And can you just clarify when you talk about the reserve fund, the amount of money you went in with this year, how the federal money played into that? I know people care about that.
Yeah, let me go backwards. We took office. We had a number of unmet needs. We had budgeted union contracts for police and correction officers. There was no money put into the budget. We had an accumulation of 7 years worth of unresolved CSEA union issues, and no money solved for that. So we had to go into the reserve fund in order to pay for those needs and drain the fund down. As it was when we walked in the door, the budget that we inherited had a revenue in it that was imaginary, money from an airport transaction that wasn't going to happen, and so we had to resolve that. So we had to go into that thing right off the bat to stabilize this county. And the commitment we made when we did the Taxpayer Protection Act and we had the additional sales tax revenue is that we would start to replenish the reserve fund and get it back up to where it needs to be. It needs to be at $150 million, I think, is a general common number that our fiscal people tell us to be sort of in the right place. And we had gotten it down under $65 million. So in the first blush of this, in the tail end of 19, we added $5 million to that reserve fund, and then the natural savings added a few more million to it. So I believe the budget closed out at $75 million as we came into 2020. Now, if we didn't have the pandemic, obviously we wouldn't have had the COVID CARES money, but we were prepared to put another $10 million into the reserve fund, and we had sufficient money to do all the other things. It's only because of COVID that we found that we lost sales tax revenue, and now we needed to compensate, and that's where the COVID CARES Act helped us resolve those issues and then allow us to have the money necessary to put into the reserve fund, which now, in transferring forward, becomes a revenue stream to balance the 21 budget.
So essentially, the money, where are you at right now with the reserve fund?
Reserve fund in this budget is at, in round numbers, $75 million, which is just about where it was as we closed out the prior year. A little higher than what we thought at about 69 or 70 million. That benefit came from the closeout of the 19 budget into 20. And now we could, in theory, leave more money in the reserve account, but then we wouldn't be able to provide the tax relief, and we wouldn't be able to cut the spending in the way we have. Very good. Other questions? We have some remote.
So the first question comes from Mark Lingariello from the Journal News. What is the year-over-year change in overall staffing?
Well, we know that because of the loss of 225 employees, that we will probably restaff about a quarter of those positions. They haven't been identified specifically to the nth degree. Some of those positions have been, but most of them have not. So that would probably represent, if you just do the simple math, of about 50 jobs, 55 jobs or so, less the 220. That would be a net loss of about 170 jobs from the VSI. We have also cut existing positions in this budget from corrections and from probation. We've cut those positions because our inmate count in the prison is significantly lower than it was. We have to maintain a certain amount of posts, so no one who's currently in the corrections or probation is losing their job. But these are vacant positions that we don't have to fill, and not having to fill them, we then delete them from the budget, and that became a savings in the budget. So, there'll be an accurate, a specific count number. I'm sure Catherine will ask this fairly early on in the review. But if you work on general numbers, depending on how you count part-time employees, Westchester County is about 4,500 employees. And when it's all said and done, I'd say about 200 employees less is a generally fair number to work with. So if we had 4,500 employees prior to this, we would be at 4,300 employees. And that is, if you wanted to round it off, it's about a 5% cut in the workforce, a little less than 5%, but in that vicinity.
Second question, this is the last question from Mark Lingariello, asks, what is the status of the new union contracts, and what is your expectation on how it could affect spending in 2021?
Well, first of all, we are currently within our contracts with CSEA. Their contract does not expire, I think, until the end of 21, if I'm not mistaken. And they are by far the largest union and the most impactful financial element of this. I believe we're in a current position with the nurses union, which is a much smaller union. I believe their contract expires at the end of 21 as well, and so we're in good state with them. The Teamsters Union, which represents management positions here in the county, has their contract expire at the end of this year, at the end of 20. So at this moment in time, they're operating within their contract, and discussions about what will happen in the future will happen going forward. We have a good relation with Lupa County and the people from Teamsters 456 on a host of issues, so we expect that dialogue will come forward. The public law enforcement unions, the police officers, superior police officers, correction officers, superior correction officers, had their contract expire at the end of last year. We have had some discussion with them. They have indicated they weren't yet ready yet to sit down and have some serious negotiations, and that, I assume, will take place probably once this budget is done in the new year. We need to see, before we make any commitments about what we're going to do going forward, if what we have estimated to be the cut from the state is in fact the cut from the state, if it doesn't widen. And we also have to see whether or not the federal government plans to do anything additional. Those are two key elements. There's a third element that we won't know until we know it, which is, will the society experience a second wave of COVID? Will we go back to what we experienced in March and April again? Or will we stay where we are right now, which is most of our society is open, but not all of it, and we have economic activity, but not all of it. And those factors would have to be determined in order for us to know what our obligation, what obligation we could satisfy within the budget that we have. But this is part of the discussion about how much we have in reserves and how much we have in different departments. And as we go forward, the picture will become clearer as to how we'll handle the workforce. But I think we showed a couple of things when we came into office, and we're showing it to this day. For example, we have the responsibility to review the Westchester Community College negotiated contracts for CSEA workers there and for teachers there, Westchester Community College Federation of Teachers. In both cases, when we received the negotiated contracts from the Board of Directors, Board of Trustees of the Community College, we reviewed it, and we immediately sent it to the Board of Legislators for their approval. We didn't hold it up based on ideology or principle, as was done in the past. So we show, I think, by that action, one of the first actions we did earlier when we first came into office, and now more recently, that we're prepared to move forward with our workforce and to try to have legitimate contracts in place. But the timing for that discussion will come in the new year after we see a few more of these variables and to see what they'll do to us and affect us. You have another question still?
Question from Mark. Is this budget operating with the expectation that Playland in the Westchester County Center will be open in 2021?
We are assuming that Playland will be open and operative. We are not assuming that the county center will be open and operative in this budget. The problems we have in administering either building, if we are in the same position of COVID today, when it comes time for the May 12th or mid-May opening of Playland, may not make it possible for us to open Playland. We don't know. Now, the governor has had an executive order that closes all amusement parks, and he hasn't lifted that yet. So even as we've had discussions about what we do with Playland, we made the decision not to open Playland. The governor's overarching executive order would have kept it closed either way. We have to make the decision if we want to open the park and can open the park, and we probably have to have at least 3 months to work with in order to gear up the park for proper opening, I'd say. So sometime by mid-February, we have to see what the status of this virus is and how widespread it is, and are we in colored zones of yellow and orange and red, all these things that are out there. County Center is a different kettle of fish because we have turned that over to the state to serve as a backup hospital. As we see hospitalizations start to rise again, I saw a number that was in the high 70s, low 80s in the last few days, significantly higher than what we saw previously. We worry about a second spike and what it'll do to the hospital availability. And we did not get to the point where we exhausted all the available rooms the last time through. We have 3,000 rooms, hospital beds in the county, 160 ICU beds. The 110 rooms over there added to that give you 3,100 and 270 ICU beds if we need it. Now, we fell short of that, thankfully, at about 1,200 hospitalized people when we were dealing with it in the spring. If we get to a point where that's the peak, that's fine. When I look back on the pandemic of 100 years ago, the second wave was more impactful than the first wave. So I think it's wise for us, as much as I hate to see it, it's wise for us to hold on to the county center as a backup medical facility in case we need it. Because if we were to deconstruct it, we're not going to reconstruct it again. So, and since it's going to be very hard for us to have events in there anyway, socially distanced events, we're not going to get the revenue that we would have had otherwise. We had big debate, we got to get the high school basketball back there for Section 1. It was a source of great pride that we did that in 2000. But you have to understand that that's not as important now as having backup medical facility people need it. So I would say the county center is not likely to be usable for us next year, so therefore we didn't budget revenue from that entity into what we're doing. If we wind up with Playland in that situation where we can't open it this year, then we will deal with it. That's the only thing you can say. Any other questions from our friends in the press? All right, so before I do the official turn off, let me just make one final comment. In closing, we're having quite a bit of debate about who is president of the United States right now. I think back on the president of my youth when I was a little boy. That was John F. Kennedy. And I remember, I didn't see it live when it happened, but I do remember we discussed it in 5th grade, I guess I was at the time, when he traveled to West Berlin. And he stood in front of the Berlin Wall, and that's his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech, in which he said we were all residents of Berlin. And what he was saying in that speech, and it's worth going to YouTube to look at it again, to see how a president can speak and move you and unify you. He spoke of the bravery of the people of West Berlin in the face of communism, in the face of pressure, and he said, if you want to see democracy, let them come to Berlin. Let them come and see it for themselves in Berlin. That is a magnificent story to be told. It is almost sacrilegious to compare a local government in the moment to that. But there is a test right now in this nation of governance, and the test is in every town hall, it's in every village hall, it's in every city hall. It's in this building, it's in Albany and every state capital, and it's in Washington, D.C. And the question is, can we, as free people, divided as we are in our philosophies, can we govern? Can we go day to day? Can we find common ground where there is disagreement between people of different political parties, between executive, legislative branches, and judicial branches for that matter? Can we self-govern? And I would argue, this is the county of my birth. Yes, I've lived here almost all of my life. Yes, it's the county that I've served as a legislator in, now as an executive in. Let them come to Westchester. Let them come and see how a county functions, how we treat our people, how we understand that there is a financial problem, how we understand that there's a concern for proper law enforcement, but at the same time, how we have a deep and abiding concern for social justice and a deep and abiding need to help the people who need it. I grew up in one of the poorest communities in this county. I live in one of the wealthier communities, although not in the wealthiest neighborhood. And I have lived the alpha and omega, and I'm not the only one who can make that statement. There are plenty of other people who can. This county is trying its very best to balance those things out. And that's what this budget does. And a budget is more than just a document of numbers. It is a policy statement. What you believe in is what you put money behind. And if you put money behind the things that you believe in, and you can in fact hire talented people, as we have, to administer those programs, then that is really what our task is. That's what our joint task is here. And I would say with great pride, come to Westchester, see what we're doing, how we're doing it. We don't purport to be brilliant people. We are everyday Americans doing the job that's required of us. And now, since my job, I've been on the other side of this handoff, by the way, more than once, as has Ken Jenkins. But nothing makes me happier than when I'm on this side of the handoff. And I can invite the Honorable Chairman of the Board of Legislators, Chairman Ben Boykin. He may want to be joined by the Majority Leader and the budget Head of Budget and Appropriations up on the podium here. As I take my headaches, Ben, and I make them your headaches. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. A warm elbow. Thank you. Good luck with the budget.
Thank you, County Executive George Latimer, and to your leadership team. Obviously, I'm joined here by the Majority Leader, Mary Jane Shimsky, and the Head of Budget and Appropriations, Catherine Borgia. Listening to this, let me say, I think we have a budget that we can really work with. I'm very pleased that this budget talks about Westchester's priorities, what we believe in. It talks about our protection of our social safety net, protection of health and welfare and benefits and public safety protection. Those are things that are important to all of us in this county. And now we will take this budget and we will go through a very deep dive with it, working in partnership with your commissioners and your department's heads. Legislator Borgia will gavel in the Budget and Appropriations Committee on Thursday, November 12th at 10 a.m. to start that review. On the 18th, we will have a public input session at 7 p.m. using WebEx. And then on December 9th, we will have our public hearing that is required for the budget. So over the next month and a few days, we will be doing the deep dive into this budget, working to make sure that the limited resources that this county has is appropriately distributed to protect the people of Westchester County. And if that, I'd ask the Legislator Mary Jane Shimsky if you want to make some comments, and then Legislator Catherine Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The news from this budget is certainly better than what we had reason to expect even a couple months ago. I do look forward to looking through it. We have a lot on our plate that even before COVID we knew we had to accomplish in terms of building up certain environmental protections in our budget, public health and infrastructure. And now, of course, we have a lot more added to that, as well as making sure that larger initiatives like criminal justice reform function as well as everyone wants them and all interests are balanced properly. We look forward, Mr. County Executive, to going through this budget with an eye toward making it as good as it can be for the people of this county and making sure that all of their interests are appropriately taken care of. So thank you very much, and we look forward to the work. Chairwoman Borgia.
Thank you, Majority Leader Shimsky. I do have to say that as legislators, we do many, many, many things to serve our constituency, but the most sacred thing we do is review and amend and pass the budget. Because as the county executive said, the budget is actually more than a plan, or it certainly isn't a contract. It's more than a plan, but it's also a reflection of where our priorities lie. I agree with my colleagues that this is a better budget than we anticipated. It is a tight budget. It is a budget that we will give lots of scrutiny to. I do have to say that I believe that budget season is actually the time when legislators make the most impact. So I am looking forward to gaveling in. Let budget season begin.
Just make sure you take the budget.
Yes. We're taking the budget, and now it's in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a good, safe day.